everyone. What does tonight's guest mean by living the shift? What is the illusion that we're living in? Do we know that we're limitless, and how do we achieve that? What are the partitions that are currently dividing us? And what is this new fifth dimension that we're all shifting into? We're going to talk about that and much, much more tonight. And tonight's Reawaken You, I'm going to challenge you to have a different perception and think outside the box. I laugh. Tonight's guest, Angela Coulter, is a good friend of mine, and for most of our spiritual conversations afterwards, I'd say, you know what, my brain hurts, and because it's been stretched so much with new ideas and examining my beliefs and trying to have a different perception, my brain doesn't hurt anymore when we have a conversation, so it's really enjoyable. So this week, I want you to stretch your mind. Maybe that job you didn't get was important because there's an even better job out there for you, or the relationship that didn't work only allowed you to learn something about yourself to find an even better relationship. So free your mind, work on perception, and think outside the box. All right, let's tell you about Angela. Angela Coulter provides intuitive spiritual guidance, healing facilitation, and instruction. She has practiced in a range of different energetic modalities, including Reiki, Theta healing, Arcing radial light, and crystal healing. She is the originator of Trinity Energy Progression, which accesses the Christ consciousness within to advance our spiritual progression and leaps and bounds. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you, Julie. I'm glad to be on the show again.
The tables were turned. Angela interviewed for me. We'll definitely tell you about her new radio show that she has, Living the Shift, because it's lots of good stuff every week. But let's get started. When you talk about living the shift, what do you mean?
Well, it's funny because when I first started doing this work, it was like everything was like my main website is Road to Awakening, right? It's how we awaken, how we start remembering who we are and how powerful we are and everything. And now it's really shifted forward through what we call this evolutionary, the spiritual shift that we're going through. And it's all about how to, because you see all of this information out there right now about different kinds of spiritual things like channelings and, things like star configurations and our energies changing and all this kind of stuff. And many people are like, oh, wow, this is going on, but they have no idea how to actually put that in their life, to actually practically practice it. And so what I was given guidance on, I don't know, about 6 months ago, is that everything is going to be really focusing on teaching people how to live the shift, how to live in a completely different way so that they can fully incorporate the spirit self into their 3D self.
All right, fantastic. So is this living the shift, is it happening personally as well as globally? Are we shifting globally into this, or is it all individual? Okay.
We're shifting not only globally, we're shifting actually universally. Every part, my understanding is every part of the universe is shifting into sort of a next phase. And so we are done with, my understanding is we're done with the old lessons. We've done them to death and we've done them really well. And now we're like, okay, on to the next game, which I call Earth 2.0, but we tend to become so Earth focused and realize, no, it's not just Earth, it's actually the entire universe is shifting. We're changing into a new game.
I just want to give you a shout out. I said this to you, I think, the last time we hung out. Something I really appreciate you do is you always say, as it's my understanding, or as I understand it. And I just want to commend you on that because I think it's really important. You're never one to shove anything down anyone's throat, and you're just like, hey, this is my understanding, and share what you've learned. But I think that's really important. So
thank you. Well, I'm glad you pointed that out because, that is important, and I'll tell you why. Because your truth and my truth aren't necessarily the same. And part of the beauty of the symphony of this entire existence has been that there is no one way to complete this whole lesson. There is, 7.1 billion people on this earth today, so there are 7.1 billion ways to finish the earth experience. So because you and I might have different opinions, doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong or vice versa. It's just what I always call different flavors of ice cream.
Right. I love that. So how do we shift, Angela?
Well, first of all, it is a desire to look at things from a bigger standpoint, from a larger perspective, because we've gotten so myopic in many ways on this is my life, this is how I've always done it. And it's starting to look at things from a more of a macro perspective simply than from a micro perspective. And so what we do We have run in this 3D dimension, 3D existence, from a very egoic standpoint of I am, and I am separate from everyone else. And what I always tell people how you look at that when we start talking about things like higher selves and tapping into the higher consciousness and all that, the way I pointed it out to people, it sort of comes across as a good metaphor, is that the ego is sort of like the pawn on a playing board. And the ego can see, and that's part of its job. Its job was to discover and study the possibility that we could possibly be separate. So every I am has an ego, right? Anything that was be separate from what I understand as the oneness or the whole of the universe is, has an ego. Anything that considers itself as a separate entity. So the ego, though, at the 3D level, is is the pawn on the playing board. It's looking at what the players in front of it are doing, the players behind it, what's right on either side of it, and it sees things in a very short-term way. So the higher self is the player sitting at the board that sees the whole game and says, well, that turn might be you might think it looks better from there, but actually if we go this way, it's much more easy and graceful. And so that's why, the next step is coming out of just the perception and living from an egoic perspective, which, by the way, is what creates fear and anxiety, resentment and anger, guilt, doubt, sorrow, pain. Anything which is what I call the separation emotions comes from the ego. And when we actually clear all that out and listen to the higher self and allow the ego to connect to the higher self, and the ego can say, the higher self can say, yeah, you know what? Let's do it this way. It's going to be much more graceful and easy. And that tends to be a whole lot more efficient for us. And then we let go of that need to feel like we're controlling in this reality and know that our higher self has our back. Then we can sort of play and have a lot more fun. Really, and that's really what the key is. It's all about having fun, because the more fun we have, the higher in vibration we go, and the more we're in joy and bliss all the time.
So for someone who is out there listening or watching and is not familiar with connecting to their higher self and kind of has been totally following their ego, just as most of us have been, what would you say to them? What small step could they take to begin to build that relationship with their higher self?
Well, every time I think I've been on your show, I always come back to okay, so there's really no way around it, but we need to meditate in some way, shape, or form. And it doesn't have to be sitting in the lotus position, on a mountain, although that's very nice because I just did that this past week. But, anything that helps you clear your mind and stop the chatter, because the chatter is all from the ego, right? And so what I do a lot of teaching of is not just, tapping into the higher self, but then, first tapping into the higher self, but then going beyond that and tapping into the Christed consciousness, which is the whole of the consciousness of the whole of us. But a really simple exercise that I teach people that's like less than 5 minutes, and I'm just going to run through it quick right now because I know we have a lot to talk about tonight, but it's simply taking a couple of deep breaths, it's closing your eyes, and then focusing on your heart. And when you breathe into your heart as if it's your heart that's actually breathing. And then you start to see a light. You envision a light or feel a light coming from your heart. And this is the light that comes forth from the oneness. This is the light of your divinity and unconditional love. And when you breathe into it, it expands, saturates your cells and in between every cell. And you can step by step go through expanding it through your chest, through your arms and your hands, and your neck and your head. You breathe in this light of beautiful divinity and unconditional love, and out any toxicity, any negativity that you're holding on to. And you breathe in, expand it down through your waist, your legs, your feet, your toes. And you keep on expanding that light until you feel every cell and in between every cell within your body fill and saturate with this beautiful light of your divinity and unconditional love. And you can hold that, you can expand it out through your auric field so you're emanating your light like a lighthouse. so that you are now a beam of light that shines out in the universe, shines to all that are around you, and helps them find their light as well. And you can hold that and then come back and open your eyes. I mean, that was really simple. That was 2 minutes. I typically do it 5 to 7 minutes. It's a great way to start your day, and that's actually a meditation.
All right, that's fantastic. And if you're listening, this is recorded, so you'll be able to listen again and go through Angela's exercise. And I want to remind you, if you have a question for Angela, call us at 919-518-9773 or Skype Computers 2K Voice. So we had a conversation earlier today, and the important things to touch on. You talk a lot about awakening to who we are. So who is it that we're awakening to? Our authentic self, our higher self? What do you mean by that?
Well, there's actually a lot of things that are attached to that. We have, again, that goes to this whole existence of separation, right? So the way I understand it, we as the eternal, as whatever you want to call it, God, source, spirit, whatever, the oneness, however you want to, creator, whatever, as that, we're eternal. So we've always been here, we're always here, we're always one, we're always the singular consciousness. And so we came up with this idea of, this is really in a nutshell, hey, what if we pretended we could separate what if I pretended I could separate myself out from myself and made separations and pretended that we were separate and put partitions in so that I created separate sort of entities of myself and then forgot that this is a game and forgot that I actually did that, so that then I could explore what it would be like to be that there could possibly be a me and a not me. And that really created the whole existence of duality, the possibility of there being a me and a not me. And then we're going to forget we're going to do it, and we're going to do this to such an umpteenth degree that we have, are going to learn, because we can. We're going to learn it in every possible way, shape, or form we can learn it. And then after we're done with the lesson, then we'll all come back to remembrance and in different levels, and then pull out those partitions and come back to the oneness.
You got that, or do you have another thought? I just want to make sure I'm not cutting you off.
I forgot the question for a minute.
That's okay. That's okay. No, you answered it. It was just what your thought about awakening to who we really are.
Okay, so.
It happens at our age. It doesn't matter.
That's okay. I sort of started floating off there again. I think I'm still a little bit at Mount Shasta. So, what we're doing now is we're completing the lessons. We've done this. We've done it really, really well. We've done it to this bazillionth degree. And when I talk about partitions, I talk about things like, we have partitioned ourselves even into a singular I am, right? And my understanding is that we've not only split ourselves up into, say, a bazillion lifetimes, a bazillion parallel timelines, but we've also split up partitioned our levels of consciousness so that we would be able to individually experience those separate levels as separate and forget that we are actually at this high. What came to me several years ago, like one of the archangels came to me and said and showed me that whole hierarchy of our consciousness in an individual, right? So going up to our I am, and I was told that that we have like 12 levels of consciousness. Standard, which is standard. Some of us have 11, some of us have 13, but most of us, a good portion of us, have 12. And our actual first level of consciousness would be at the cellular level, because our cells have consciousness of their own. They know what they're there to do. They know how to fulfill what they are there. They have a DNA blueprint of what they're a part of. And then they form the organs. Organs have a level of consciousness, and the organs come together and form our body. And this is only our third level of consciousness. Well, if we have 12 or 11 or 13 levels of consciousness, this is a really low level. And we are actually operating at a very high level of consciousness, but we've put these partitions in so that we had that whole experience of separation. And we forget. When we come into the body, my understanding is that was part of the game, was that we would forget so that we could just fully immerse ourselves in the experience. So remembering who we are is pulling out those partitions so that we start assimilating and actively, consciously assimilating our entire being of consciousness all together from at this level of reality, at the 3D reality. And that was the way we were going to complete the lesson.
So what's going to happen as we start to remove the partitions? Do we become light? Do we go back to our soul? You have any comments on that?
Well, there's a whole lot of partitions for us to remove. So that is really the focus of the Trinity energy progression that I teach. That came into me to start teaching a couple of years ago. And it's really not just like some people say, is it an energy modality? What is it? Well, yeah, it is in a way. It's a tool that allows us to open the channels back into the Christic consciousness so that we could start seeing things from the bigger perspective, working from the largest perspective, and pulling out the partitions step by step, because that's really what prevents us from coming into our full power, which is we've put in all these partitions and we've separated ourselves off in all these different parts so that we have forgotten from this level of consciousness, we have forgotten the whole of our consciousness and the power and divinity that are within us. So that what the awakening part is all about is, in whatever way, because everybody's got a different way of doing it or a different process of doing it, and how they come about it. It's pulling out the partitions of, remembering our other lifetimes, remembering, and right now a lot of people are remembering going to sleep and they're stepping into other parallel timelines, and because those are all resolving into this one, and remembering the higher self, remembering who our higher self is, and not only that, but that we aren't just, these beings that live here on earth, but we're also actually the angels and archangels and ascended masters in human form as parts of that consciousness here, because that was part of the lesson. That was part of what we went to learn.
So we're going to get a little woo-woo. You're probably the best person to get a little woo-woo with. But,
absolutely.
But can you give examples? I mean, I think I've mentioned this on the show. I'll just, I guess, share the biggest thing. I was telling Angela today. At night, I've been seeing things with my eyes open. I would say before I would see things closed. I'm clairaudient, so I hear things. But probably about a month ago, it was daytime. I was open, and all of a sudden, I felt like I was in a sea, and I thought they were amoebas. And I thought, wow, maybe I'm back in Atlantis. But it's the only time I'm like, I am in this. I am here. And then I'm like, no, it's not even Atlantis. It's like I'm going back to time when there's the cells dividing in the beginning of human life. That's just what my intuitive thought. But I was there. And so cool. I use that as an example because, most people be like, whoa, were you doing drugs and not doing drugs? But they might have experiences like that having the glimpses of the partitions being removed and think they're going crazy. So can you address that?
Well, so that's part of, in awakening, okay, we're taking out the partitions, and in taking out the partitions, it's also taking away our boxes, right? Our boxes are all about our beliefs and what we believe or don't believe, right? One of the things I talk about, and I think I've talked about it on my radio show or on one of my webcasts or something, is the whole debate on when's a stub toe just a stub toe. It's when we start putting meaning and understanding that everything in the physical comes from the non-physical. And it's either, I've had this debate, and it's like, if you look at it from the purest standpoint, either you totally get it, or you totally believe it, or you totally discount it. But there's no in between, because every in between is where the ego says, oh, I can take this, but I can't take that. Well, that means there's a resistance to it, right? So people are starting to experience things that are way outside their box because it is a mass awakening that we're going through. And my understanding is that we agreed to pull off the Band-Aid. So we're doing it in a very quick fashion in terms of the universal standard that we have set before. And so what I would tell people is, when you start seeing things, first of all, don't think you're crazy. Don't go on medication. See somebody who could actually help you start exploring that and find out what that is. Because many times it can be a past life. It is a memory. It is some kind of memory that you're getting. And it's funny because when we look at taking away partitions, it changes our perspective on how we work in the universe. It's a whole different way of living and perception, because now we're saying, I have everything. I have all the knowledge I need. I know all of it. I can tap into all of it. But I've put up these partitions that are preventing me from doing so. And as I pull out those partitions, I'm remembering more and more. And that tends to happen naturally. So the more you work on yourself to release the partitions, and partitions have to do with things we resist, we deny, we repress. When we pull out those partitions and we allow it with flow, we allow everything to flow through, we start to remember more and more. And so your experience might usually becomes more and more bizarre according to the old normal. Because there is no normal anymore. I mean, normal is just individual. It's for the individual.
So talk about, we also briefly talked, I want to do an entire show devoted to The Matrix. And if you all haven't watched, we watched it this past Saturday because the first time I watched it, whatever it came out in 99 or whatever it was, my brain hurt. I didn't get it. I'm like, I'm annoyed. This movie's dumb. Now, after all this work I've done, I was like, afterwards, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got on Google, spiritual, perspectives of The Matrix. But talk about that this is an illusion.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love The Matrix because of that. And actually, my favorite part of that entire series is when he goes to the Oracle and there's that little boy, and he's bending the spoon, right? And he says to Neo, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was like, don't think of how you can bend a spoon, but look at it, from the truth. And he said, well, what's that? And the kid says, there is no spoon. So that's the other thing, is when we look at it, if you look at it from that larger standpoint, from the understanding of, okay, so we are the eternal, we decided to put up these partitions and play this game. It truly is a play. And we're just playing out plays that we decided to do because of the lessons we wanted to learn. And when we actually go back, the Christed consciousness is the consciousness of that oneness. And when we go back to working with that purely, in purity, which is straight out of unconditional love, and there's no way to misuse it because there's no ego in the Christ consciousness. It is simply unconditional love. When you look at things that way and you see the illusion as it is and you see that it's all an illusion, then you realize you can change everything. You can do anything. It's a matter of what we have in the way, what partitions we have in the way to release that'll allow us to do it.
So big events, say like Trayvon Martin has divided the country. I don't know, divided might be too strong of a word, or the Sandy Hook shootings, things like that. So that's an illusion. And so when people have such strong reactions, what would you say about that? Is that for them to release things, or what are your thoughts?
That's actually a great question, because I talk about this a lot, because we have more and more of those kind of, mass shootings, mass deaths, all that kind of stuff is happening. And there's all this drama around it, and people put all this drama to it, and they're like, oh my gosh, and they lose all this energy to focusing on the events. So first of all, what I try to work with people on is changing that perception to realizing this. Number one, we never do anything we have not volunteered to do. There is nothing that happens to us that we did not volunteer to do at some level so that we could have a certain experience, so that we could have a certain catalyst. And many times when we have mass shootings, because they become nationally, internationally visible, there's a lesson in it for all of us. It's a lesson for us. And those people, number one, have agreed to do this, have agreed to be the ones that set up this particular lesson. And number two, have decided that they're done here. And that's going to happen more and more, because many don't want to be here through the transition. Many people have decided, okay, I've done what I came here to do, and I'm going to go. So more and more there are going to be doorways that open up that allow people to transition out. And it's instantaneous. Every time I have checked in on shootings and things like that, like when I remember the big thing, was it Connecticut, where they had the shooting of the kids at the school or something?
That's Sandy Hook. Last year.
Yeah. And so last year, I went and checked in. I had a couple other practitioners that work with me. They checked in, and we all got the same thing, that the kids were like, hey, job well done. All done. Now we can move on. So we put all this angst and stuff about, oh, my God, this happened to these kids. The change in perception is, what is this being presented to us collectively as? Like, why? And for what lesson? The Boston Marathon thing, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody was all focused on that. And, like, really, what was it? 2 people died? I think it was like 2 people died. Yeah, like 100 were hurt and stuff. But here's the thing. That's actually progress. Because a year ago, it might have been like 300 people died, because that would be what it would have taken for us to really pay attention to the whole lesson that was involved, which part of it is taking care of each other and paying attention to each other and knowing that we're all connected.
I love that. I think that's really important. I want to talk, jump on something you said, that people who are exiting early. Oh, I have 2 thoughts. One, you talked earlier about timelines collapsing into this one. So the best analogy, because I'm really old, I'm laughing. We talked earlier how I'm like, oh my God, there are all these spiritual TV shows and all this stuff they've been on for years. Where have I been? But I kind of envision, what was it? Was it the hologram on Star Trek? And so this life, I kind of vision my soul in a really kind of cool big old chair hanging out, and all my lives are kind of up on the screen, and so I'm like kind of
cool.
directing myself and like watching. And so is that kind of what it is when that's the illusion, when we kind of bring that back to the Matrix, that the soul's hanging out in the chair and then the different lives are just the play?
Yeah, sure. If you want to look at it that way, that's a great way of visualizing it. What I like to look at, what I like to think is this, it really is sort of like the Matrix. We're going into this period of time where I don't know, and you and I were talking about this before. I've seen this for a while where it's almost like an amoeba and we have this reality splitting into two. And it's just because a bunch of us are getting to this point where we're ready to get to the next level, and some still have some work to do. And it's not that anybody's getting left behind. It's that they just have some more lessons to do before they get to a certain point. But I understand that it's sort of splitting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we were talking about this, and it's like, well, what's going to happen, or what is happening, is that more and more of us are going to start living in this new reality, in this new earth or whatever, and then sort of popping back and forth into the other one to help the others along, because that's all part of why we're here. We all came in to help each other and to finish the lessons, and it's like booyah, the big party, So nobody gets left behind. It's just that we sort of are taking baby steps, right? And so to me, it's almost like the Matrix, the way I've seen it is, but it's sort of the opposite, where, in the Matrix, you go out of the Matrix and it's really cruddy and dingy and all that kind of stuff, where actually it's sort of like you go out of the Matrix and it's really amazingly beautiful and awesome and magnificent. And then, we sort of have to deal with the same stuff in the old reality, or when we go back into the Matrix until, but with that perspective of knowing what the reality truly is, and that's that whole unconditional love and that connectedness.
So what is it, and you touched on this, so what's the transition? Are people going to feel different? Are they going to wake up one day and I don't know, the sky is going to be purple? What is it that we're transitioning into, and how can people ease that transition?
Well, it's like I said before, it's very individual for the person. So it all depends on how they're tying up their lessons. My understanding is that we have 3 lives or less in this form, doing this form exactly as this in this way before we're all there, right? So that's a lot of stuff to clear up in I don't know, say we've had 1,000 lifetimes as human, who knows, and other beings or whatever. But the way to start clearing it up is truly to start doing the work, clearly to stop living in the illusion, and not just living in the illusion, but becoming immersed in the illusion, right? And realizing that we are the ones that create our play. We are the ones who create our reality. And my reality is my reality. Everything around me is what I've created, as everything you've created is your reality. And we've had all these, the mind can start blowing when you start thinking about, oh my God, think of how many different realities there are, because that's what we wanted to do, right? It's that whole individual possibility of separation. So the key is to change our perception, to start seeing things from a higher perspective, from a perspective of oneness, because that's really what we're going to. And my understanding is that we'll still have an individual, but it's going to be very different. And we're still going to stay very connected. That's sort of the next play of the game, but I'm not clear as to what that is, because we didn't want to see all of it. We want to get through the closing of these lessons first. And when we are in a much more connected state, we're in a much more loving and fluid state, because there's no fear or anxiety or that kind of stuff, because of the fact that we know that we're all connected, we're all one, it's all an illusion anyway. So step by step, whatever it takes for you to do, clear your mind. Like I said, start clearing your mind, clearing the ego, so that you can start listening to the higher self, start working on assimilating all those levels of consciousness, and start changing our perception from that we have to actually attain something that's outside of us, and realizing that it's all inside of us, that we're all connected to the divine. We all are all the divine, and we are all perfect. And that's really something that's hard for people to understand and take, because we're like, oh no, because we've done all this with the ego and that disempowerment of, no, you're nothing, you're humble. I had somebody ask me at one of my open discussion groups once about that. What's the difference? Where does pride and humility come in? I said, well, pride and humility is based on duality. It's not actually in existence. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, here's the thing. If I sit here and say, yeah, I'm awesome, I'm magnificent, I'm awesome, I'm perfect, I am amazing, and you know what? So are you. And so is everybody else I know. And it is so amazing that we did this. Then what is there to be humble about? What is there to be prideful about? It's just a matter of it just is. And it's just acceptance of the amazing, magnificent beings that we all are. And if we all just changed our perception to living that way, this world would just change instantaneously.
I agree. I agree. Now let's talk about. I really appreciated your airport story recently, and the counter and how you changed that, because I think that's a really good example of you created it and stepping back before you blew your lid. So tell everyone about that.
Yeah, and that is a great example of changing our perception. And I do it all the time, and I've been working it, and I teach it with the Trinity and with other kinds of meditation and tapping in. And so, really, the key is living it. That's all the living the shift. So, I went to Mount Shasta this past week with other kinds of to do a retreat and a class that I was teaching, and that's in California, so it's cross country. And I am so used to setting my whole reality so that everything is fluid and graceful and easy and everything else. So I had 5 people going out there with me. I was going out early. 2 other people were going out there a day earlier, and then everybody else was coming the next day, so that then we could all go out together. Because I was the bus, right? So I'm used to everything flowing smoothly. Go and leave, and on the second flight, we were delayed 2 hours, and it threw everything off. And so we missed our flight going from Denver to Oregon, and which is where we're going to have to drive from. And literally, we ran to the gate and saw the plane, and they had already shut the door, and they wouldn't let us on. We're like, seriously, like nobody called ahead, because there were so many people. That plane I was on was full, and so many people had tight connections because of that delay. So because Medford, Oregon is a small airport, there were no other flights going out that night. We go up to this guy, we go to the customer service guy for the airline, and the woman and I who were there together, that we were traveling out there together, okay, we were irritated for us. Okay, that's about 20% of what most people would get. But I was like, nobody called the airline, nobody called ahead. And so right away, it's like funny because you're irritated now. I'm like, oh my God, now this whole plan just sort of fell apart, because the guy starts telling us, well, there's no other flights tonight. He's like, there's 1 seat on a flight tomorrow morning. And oh, nope, that was just filled. So the next time you could get there is tomorrow night at this time, like 9:30 at night, which would mean that everybody who was meeting me there would have to sit in the airport for an entire day waiting for me. So I was like, oh my God. I was like, no, that's totally not acceptable. And my friend and I were looking, and then it was really funny because then something sort of just came over me. It was this consciousness of this. I create this. This is mine. This is my reality. So therefore, there's something in me that's created this situation. This guy sitting here is a reflection of that. And for me to externalize it and project that blame onto him is not the conscious way of doing it. So I'm like, he didn't create the situation. He's just the messenger. He's the messenger that actually made me look in the mirror and say, okay, so what is it about this that I'm causing myself? And when I stopped and did that, it was funny. I decided, you know what, the poor guy, because now there are 50 people online behind us that are really irritated because they missed their connections too. And he's sitting there, and you could just feel him all like tense and tied up. And so I just doused him with love. And the funny thing was, as soon as I started doing that, his entire attitude changed. I mean, literally, from my heart to his, I simply just doused him with love. And I made I actually looked at my friend and co-traveler and said, maybe we should just rent a car. We're in Denver, right? Maybe we should just rent a car and drive to Medford. And so I asked the guy, how long of a drive is it? And at that point, it broke the ice. I had taken the blame off of him, and he's like, well, let me look it up for you. And he goes, it's like 18 hours. And I was like, all right, that's really not real. That's not realistic. So then he said, you know what? Let's see where I could get you that's within driving distance. So then he was like really in a much better place of working with us and much more relaxed, because now he didn't feel like I was shooting arrows at him, right? And at the end of the time, we ended up flying into Portland and then driving down, which was like a 4.5-hour drive. And I still got there the next morning, very tired, but we did. There were all these little hiccups that happened, not just at that airport, but through the time of when I started picking up people. And right before that happened, I went out and went into Trinity. I went into meditation, whatever you want to call it, and asked to be shown, to release whatever it is that has caused all this. And I realized, of course it was me. Of course it wasn't just me, but the other 5 people that were involved as well. 90, we're really getting into this doorway. My understanding is we're moving through this doorway, and it was a huge shift for all of us on this retreat this past week. But there's 95% of us that are like, so booyah, we're so excited into this new reality, into this whole, totally submerging ourselves, letting go of the old world, so to speak. But there's that 5% that was saying, are we really ready? Can we really do this? Are we really ready to let go of what we're so used to and we've done for so much? And once I actually cleared all that out, and of course their higher selves had all agreed to it since they were all part of that retreat. So we all connected etherically and we cleared that out. From that moment on, everything smoothed out. We didn't have any more problems for the rest of the week. So it's amazing when we take that responsibility on and we say, you know what? This is me, and there's something within me that's causing these hiccups or these brick walls, and I need to look in the mirror and see what that is. And when we become into the habit of taking off the blame of other people and realizing that I'm responsible for my entire reality, then we can make it whatever we want. But we just have to be willing to look in the mirror and realize what that is so that we can release it and remove that partition that's preventing us from doing that.
I love that. And I have a quick question for you, but I want to remind everyone, if you have a question for Angela, chat it or call it 919-518-9773 or Computers 2K Voice. So what would you say, and I'll use myself as an example. So I'm very spiritual and I completely get what you're saying, but what about someone like my fiance? We have been struggling to sell something, and I was like, well, where do you, trying to, in a roundabout way, like, where do you feel stuck in your life, or how would you describe the fact that it's not selling, and where would you, so for someone, what would you say to that? Someone's maybe in a relationship with someone that's not, I don't want to say as enlightened, but just this is a little woo-woo for them. How can you help someone else dip that toe or bring that into a relationship?
The biggest way for us to do that is to work on ourselves, because the more we do that, and I say this all the time, because so many people come to me, they're like, oh, well, I'm so worried about my spouse. I'm so worried about, this person. I'm so worried about my best friend, my parents, my siblings, whatever, because they're just not getting it. And I say, you know what? It doesn't matter, because your journey is yours and theirs is theirs. And here's the thing. The more we work on ourselves and pull out those partitions, the more we come into our power. The more we come into our power, the more we raise our vibration. And it raises the vibration of everyone around us. When we do that. And so by helping ourselves, we're helping everyone else, because we're sitting in love and we're emitting more love in this world. And the more we do that, the more we're raising the vibration of everything around us. So what happens, and I promise this to you and to everybody, the more you work on yourself, the more you find the people around you start changing and they start getting it. It just takes time. Sometimes it takes longer than others. I mean, I've seen a friend of mine who had this really big friction going on with her husband because they were in very, very different places, and he was so not into it when she first started doing this work. She changed her entire life. She released all of these bazillion different allergies and physical irritations that she'd had for years that the doctors could never do anything about, and she released everything. And she became this effusive, amazing woman that just emanated love and light. And you know what happened was, it was funny, she took the Trinity class from me last fall. I didn't see her for several months. I go back, and her entire household had changed. Her husband actually started talking to her about this stuff. And he actually let her do work on him. And he was like, wow, this is really powerful, and I can feel a difference. And then he was actually open to talking about different perceptions and releasing the box, and maybe not releasing the box all the way, but expanding the box out to consider more within that, and that naturally happens, because the more we focus on that, because then the people who love us are going to always love us. Or if they don't, it's because anything that they think or anything that they feel has to do with them. It has nothing to do with you. And so the more you raise your vibration, the more you're going to attract those who are going to be around you, who are going to have that vibration or want to be at that vibration. Because in our physics, our physics even show that something of a higher vibration and a lower vibration, the lower vibration will rise up to meet the higher one. And eventually, if you continue to emanate at this higher vibration, it tends to just shift everything around you, because then you're recreating your own reality from that perception.
Oh, I like that. So I guess it's back to the drawing board. Got to work on myself some more.
Yeah,
but that's all right.
And
you know what? All the good things have come in my life from doing all the work, as Angela knows, because I'm finding Tony and getting married, and that was a direct result of clearing as much crud as humanly possible from me. So I think that's a wonderful answer. So let's talk a little bit about being limitless as I stumble on that word.
I know, say that 5 times fast.
What prevents us? We are limitless, and like you said earlier, we're perfect. Where do we get stuck in not believing that and limiting ourselves, and how can we change that?
Well, again, that was part of the lesson. That was part of the whole duality thing. And in duality, we disempower ourselves. When we say that there could possibly be a not me, we say that there could possibly be something that we are not, which means, and so we have really disempowered ourselves. It's been the way we have evolved ourselves so that we could experience that not being powerful, right? The perception that I'm not powerful, and have people take that away from us. And people convince us that, all right, you're just a loser. Or only certain people can do this. Only certain people are psychic. Only certain people, are clairvoyant. Only certain people can do this. Only certain people are healers. Well, that's been part of that whole lesson of duality. And again, it goes back to when I teach the Trinity stuff. Really, when we go to the Christ of consciousness and remember all that we really are, and we start realizing that we are part of the oneness, we are all perfect and amazing and magnificent. The more we do that, the more the partitions that we take out that have prevented us from seeing that because we wanted to have that for the lesson, the more we start remembering that we can do that, and the more powerful we naturally become. So the thing is, it's funny. I see things like instantaneous healings. I see things instantaneously change in people's lives when they start clearing stuff out. Somebody asked me once recently, and I was really surprised about the question because it was somebody who actually does the kind of work that I do. And they said, well, are you ready for the magic? And I said, what do you mean? They're like, are you ready for the magic to come back? And I said, oh my God, like every day is magic. Like my life is every day I see miracles. I experience what we would call miracles because of the fact that I've let go of the belief that things have to be finite. And so limitations are all what we have decided to believe because of what we wanted to learn in duality, that we could not be something. And that's part of pulling out the partitions. The more we release those limitations, the more partitions we pull out. The more we release the belief of those limitations, the more the partitions we pull out, and the more powerful we become. And then it's just like the sky's the limit, I personally am at the point of going, okay, I'm ready for teleportation and levitation by location, and I'm just waiting any day now.
Well, I'm up for it. I want all the stuff I've seen on Star Trek to happen.
Absolutely.
Because you know what? I hate flying. I'd rather use... Now, Amnon corrected me. It was a holodeck. I misspoke earlier, not the hologram, the holodeck. And what was the thing the teleporter? Is that right? Is that what they called it?
I think so.
When they went in the beam me up,
Beam me up, Scotty.
Beam me up, Scotty. Now, we got a question for you here on chat, Angela.
Okay.
Dr. R wants to know, is there a difference between a deep religious belief in Christ and Christ consciousness?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, there's a huge difference. Because what many misunderstand is that Christed consciousness is connected to Jesus Christ. Actually, the word Christ consciousness, or the term Christ consciousness, or the concept of that, was around well before Jesus or Yeshua or Jeshua, however you want to call him, was born. And the reason that Christ was added to his name was when he achieved enlightenment, he actually perceived the world through the Christed consciousness. So he came after. Right, so the Christed consciousness is also called Buddhic consciousness. It's called yogic consciousness. It's called divine consciousness. It's all the same thing. So it's not tied specifically into Yeshua, though he was one who actually achieved that and lived from it fully in the human form before he left.
Oh, I didn't know that. I just learned a lot. That makes me really happy.
Yeah, and I have a lot of people who ask me that because they're like, well, I'm not necessarily a Christian father. I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with the Christian church. And what further confuses them sometimes is because I do talk about Yeshua being one of my guides and who had helped me come to this, the understanding of teaching the Trinity energy progression to get back to that. But it's like, no, because I've also talked to Buddha, and I've talked to Krishna, and I've talked to many others who we consider to be of that level of consciousness. And it's not specific to Jesus, no.
So as we start to live the shift, then that's automatically going to raise our awareness and consciousness, correct?
Yes, because one of the things that I push, that I really talk about a lot and really encourage, not push, I encourage it, is learning how to take all these perceptions and not just keeping it in your meditation, right? Because people ask, well, how do you integrate it into your life? So that's become my crusade of teaching people. This is how we start to integrate this stuff into our everyday lives. Because of the boxes that we've created, we have, separated our spirituality from our work, from our play, from our everyday, our everyday lives. And everything's like in this box. And so the key is to take out all the boxes and realize that, I'm sure you've seen the quote, we're not, bodies with a spirit, we're spirit, we're not humans with a spirit, we're spirits having a human experience. That's really what we're doing. And part of the human experience is like coming into a part of just a part of our consciousness in these bodies to perceive separation and see what that's like. So now we're done with that. So when we start taking that out, we take out these partitions and realize, okay, my work is my calling, right? And regardless of whether you're a janitor, a garbage collector, or do what I do, or an architect or whatever, if it is in your heart, if it is what truly gives you bliss, that is your calling. Because that's what you came here to do. And there's always a way to do that. And really, when you find your calling, when you are in your bliss every single day, that there's nothing you can do but be spiritual about it. And because you know that your spirit is so excited that you finally remember that this is what you came here to do, that everything seems to fall into place for you. Everything starts to just flow in a much different way. So that's why it's really important to start living these concepts and how we, I do this radio show now called Living the Shift on Voice America, and I talk about different concepts and how we integrate it. Like, for example, next week my show is about the integration of sexuality and spirituality. I've talked about integrating psychology and spirituality. We've talked about, I'm trying to think, I'm totally blanking on other topics, but I know I've done a whole bunch of different ones that talk about how to take certain things that we traditionally have perceived as separate from spirituality, and seeing how when we take the walls down, how it's even better. Science and spirituality, that was a great episode where I had a lab scientist on, and we talked about how spirituality and science actually really are melded together. And so it's taking these concepts and realizing that we don't have partitions. If we take the boxes down, it all flows together. And when we do that, we get a much bigger perspective of the universe.
Absolutely. Well, first, I love how you talk about, you're right, whether you're a janitor, a garbage collector, if it's in your heart, that's what you're meant to do. And I think in our society
Absolutely.
that's about being on MTV or being a football player or whatever, we've gotten lost out of this. But I want to ask you a question. Can that shift and change? For instance, I, 4 years ago, started out my business. I loved it. And then this randomly, well, not so randomly, came along. I mean, I was meant to do that, and then this was a whole other thing that I got excited about. So is it just really a matter of following our heart?
Oh, absolutely, because it does change. And my understanding is that, like this, I did marketing for 20 years, right? I was in corporate for 17, and I liked what I did a lot. Because it was creating, right? But what happens is when you pull out the specifics and the semantics around, like, say, your positions, everything you do leads up to the next thing, right? So, people always ask me, how do I know if I'm on the right path? And I'm like, well, as long as you're on the right path. Like, there's no wrong path because you're learning the lessons you set out to learn. Now, if you're done with the suffering part, if you're done with, having to live from lack, then you can pull out those partitions, and now we can look at, okay, so I have this as my basis of knowledge, right? I left corporate in 2006. I started an herb nursery, which was totally out of my box completely. I did that for several years. That sort of fell apart in 2008 when we had the economic adjustment. And then I went back to marketing for a while. Well, then I had my grand awakening while I was doing, and I had a successful marketing business. That's when you and I met.
Yep.
And then that was when I was told, yeah, this is what you came here to do. And at first it scared me to death because I was like, what are you talking about? No, you're talking to the wrong person. That would be the person 4 doors down. You're missing out. And sometimes when we start connecting in or we have an awakening, that's what happens is we sort of get really shifted in a really quick way. But I also came to understand that because then part of your mind starts going, well, my God, so I wasted all these years, right? I'm in my 40s, right? But no, it was all preparation. It was all understanding, and all of this stuff that I learned through what I did before all led up to what I'm doing now, right? So now, and what I'm doing is changing all the time, and I know that there's a lot more for me to do, and I don't see all of it except for the fact that I trust my higher self to lead me in the direction that's going to like give me bliss, right? And like even doing the radio show wasn't even on my radar. That sort of like when you let go and start connecting in like that, then you get this guidance. And if you trust it and you say, okay, I'm sort of up for anything. I love doing that show, and I can see where it's leading me and what that's actually prepping me to do. So it's every step of the way is a step in the right direction. It's just how we want to achieve that. And it's okay. Like sometimes we're doing something until we can come to the freedom to let go of the same old, to let go of the box so that we can actually pursue what our heart desires.
I think
until we allow ourselves to do that.
And we get in the more of the flow that the universe
Right.
conspires to work with you. And, you know, I laughed, we were talking about earlier, I'm really working hard on listening to my higher self. And a couple of times I've been like, really? Seriously? And, you know, I laughed like I had gotten a little, after one of the guests, a little pendulum to practice with. And I said, okay, am I supposed to go bowling tonight? And I didn't want to go. And it was like, where, yeah. And I'm like, seriously? And then I, you know, would ask 50 times. I'm like, all right, you should probably listen because it's about to break your hand in half. Well, that's where I met my fiance. Or other times, you know, we were talking about something happened and I was like, okay, I let go of my attachment. I give it up. I just trust that you're right. And then like the flow just came out and things all fell together. And because I was prepared to have to not get what I wanted, but it all worked out.
Yeah, I know. And you're a perfect example. I always tell people about that whole, you know, when you used to talk about when am I going to meet the guy, you know, when am I going to meet the guy and this and that. And somebody said to you, oh, well, you know, when you don't need to anymore. And you were really at that point. And then you just met him because it was so easy, right?
Easy. And it continues to be easy. Now, you've talked a lot about lifting partitions. So how does someone do it? Is it through taking Trinity energy, saying, hey, lift the partitions, a mental shift? What are the different ways that people can do that?
Well, there's an endless number of ways to do it. And it depends on what you prefer. There's all different kinds of energy work you can do, whether it's, you know, shamanic, there are energy modalities and stuff. The reason, so the reason that Trinity energy progression came in when it did, how it was explained to me that I had signed up to do this or volunteered to do this and help bring people to remembrance of this, is that it takes you right into the Christed consciousness, and it's really a fast track, which is sort of where we are, the fast track, because it bypasses all these ceremonies and tools and requirements, and it basically is pulling out the partitions, right? So that's one way to do it. One way is to learn that, right? Another way, there's a bazillion other ways. If you just meditate, there's somebody that I'm working with who's actually in prison, who I'm planning on having on my show at some time in the near future, who is one of the most beautiful, amazing people that I know, and who has simply been able to take down the partitions by me teaching her how to meditate. And she actually it's a form of, and actually I've taught her how to go into the Christed consciousness, which really, I sort of taught her Trinity without teaching her Trinity. And she's one of the most powerful people, powerful and beautiful, and she does all this healing work, and now she's raising the vibration of those around her. And look at where she is, and because that was part of her thing that she volunteered to do.
I love that. I think that's really inspiring. So what advice would you have for someone that's struggling? They're in a really tough place and, you know, maybe can't see right now that they're limitless and just struggling. What advice would you have for them?
Start exploring how to change, because the first step is to start taking our own responsibility, right? Taking and releasing blame on everything else, and to turn the mirror around on ourselves. And to do that, it's really, and again, it's so funny. I think we always come back to this, Julie, which is, you know, the whole meditation thing. You have to find a way to connect to your higher self, because the ego is what projects, it's what remembers. It puts all this like kind of energy of separation and emotion and things like that into it, where the higher self has the clear understanding from love and from the bigger picture of what's going to work for us in the highest and best way. We can release. And so if you need help, you can come to a practitioner like me or like a whole bunch of other ones. Like I said, it's all different flavors of ice cream and what resonates with you. You have a lot of different people on your show that do a bunch of different kinds of work that basically comes to the same thing. And And so just find somebody to help you. Take a class. Start just learning how to meditate and clearing your mind. And I think, Julie, you had told me once that one of the best meditations you have is when you mow your yard, because like everything goes away. And that's a form of meditation too. Anything that you do that can clear your mind. There's a person that I asked recently, and they said working in the yard, connecting with the earth, really clears their mind, which that helps for a lot of people when they garden and stuff. So just find what it is that's going to allow you to clear your mind. Take a breath, be in the moment, because eventually that's what we learn to do, is just be right now without projecting or remembering or living in the past, living in the future, what if, and just saying right now, I am perfect and I am in love with myself, and what is wrong right now? Eckhart Tolle's original book, The Power of Now, is wonderful in talking about that. And it's all about being present. I didn't even understand it when I read it, because I read it like, oh yeah, whatever. That was like back in like 2000, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I realize that's what I've gotten to, is just totally existing in the moment, because that's all there really is. Everything else is made up. So whatever it takes for us to get there, that's the step to make. That's why that clearing the mind is so important. And I think I've seen this on Facebook too. It's like a quote. I don't know whose quote that is, but it's like, if you have time, meditate, for half hour every day, and if you don't have time, meditate for an hour. Because seriously, it changes your life. And when you do it regularly, you actually become more in the flow, and you can get more done because of the fact that you're a lot clearer, and you're not getting lost in the ego and getting lost in this level of reality.
Okay, well, you might have answered my second question. You gave us lots of good advice, but what one thing, after all the good advice you've given us tonight, can people do right after the show, before they go to bed, or tomorrow morning to reawaken their brilliance?
Well, go meditate. That's what I was saying.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, unless you want to add anything else. So tell us about how people can learn more information. I know you have a Trinity class coming up. Tell us your show, all that good stuff.
If you want more information on the Trinity, on what Trinity Energy Progression is, there is a website. It's trinityenergyprogression.com. I also have a video on the sidebar there that sort of explains it. I have a bunch of stuff that I do about that. I have a class coming up on August 2nd through 4th here in the Raleigh area. And then others, I'm starting to travel around the country and do them in different places as well. So you can follow that on the site. My main website is still roadtoawakening.net. And all of my stuff is listed through there. I also have a radio show that's every Tuesday, 4 to 5 online on voiceamerica.com called Living the Shift, Our Evolution of Mind, Body, and Spirit, where I talk about all this stuff too. And I'm on Facebook. I have the Road to Awakening page. I have the Twitter account that's Road #2 Awakening. So I'm all over the place. But roadtoawakening.net and trinityenergyprogression.com are the two main sites where you can find all this information.
All right, fantastic. I got all those up in the chat room. So it's always a pleasure. My brain didn't hurt tonight, so I'm very excited. And
that's awesome, because that means that you've just so expanded.
I've enjoyed. You're someone I've had for years now, spiritual conversations. So every time we get together, I always learn something and truly enjoy it. So check out our show on Tuesdays, 4 to 5 p.m. And again, trinityenergyprogression.com and roadtoawakening.net, which is all groovy information. I want to remind everyone that's listening, contest ends next July 31st. So if you're someone groovy like Angela and doing wonderful, amazing things for the world, I want to give you the opportunity to be interviewed and get the word out. So go to reawakenyourbrilliance.com and check under the contest tab, and you can find out more information. September 24th will be our next online class about inside and out, clearing your life. And Angela's going to be a part of our panel in October on conscious parenting that I'm getting together. So look for more information for that. All right. Thank you, Angela. And thank you, everyone else.
Julie.
We'll see you here next week. All right. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Sundays 9 a.m. till noon. Carrie's Psychic Cafe with Carrie Silkowski, Sundays 8 till 9 p.m. Health Inn with Debbie Brooke, Mondays 11 a.m. till noon. Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Mondays 8 till 9 p.m. Reawaken Your Brilliance with Julie Seibert, Wednesdays 9 till 10 p.m. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by ThatVidBlasterGuy.com, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.